For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant. A young species from a harsh, unremarkable star system. Physically fragile. Technologically inefficient. In the vast ledgers of the Galactic Council, Earth was little more than a marginal entry, developing civilization, minimal strategic value. Humanity was permitted to exist not because it mattered, but because it didn't. Ignored by the galaxy. Dismissed by those in power. The Council had learned to fear ambition, not persistence. Civilizations that expanded too quickly, demanded too loudly, or challenged authority openly were monitored, pressured, or erased. Humanity did none of those things. They struggled. They argued among themselves. They advanced unevenly, often setting themselves back as fast as they moved forward. To the Council, this was proof enough. No one realized how dangerous that conclusion was. Because humanity did not evolve under stability. They evolved under failure. Their history was a repeating pattern of collapse and recovery. Governments falling, economies shattering, environments turning hostile. Systems humans depended on failed them regularly, sometimes catastrophically. And each time, humanity adapted. Not elegantly, not efficiently, but relentlessly. They learned early that no structure was permanent. No authority infallible. Survival, to humans, was never guaranteed. It was engineered, improvised, and defended daily. So when humanity finally reached beyond its home system and brushed against the edges of galactic society, they did not arrive with fanfare. They sent probes, listened to broadcasts, studied trade flows and political fault lines. They watched. The Council mistook this caution for timidity. They believed humanity understood its place. In truth, humanity was learning how power really worked. They saw that the Council ruled not through constant force, but through exclusion. Access to trade. Access to information. Access to legitimacy. A species didn't need to be conquered to be controlled. It only needed to believe survival required permission. Humanity took note. When formal contact finally occurred, it was intentionally unremarkable. Perfectly filed requests. Meticulous adherence to protocol. Polite questions asked without urgency or emotion. The Council barely paid attention. Insignificant species did not become relevant simply by behaving well. Then came the decision. Humanity was labeled non-compliant. Too independent. Too unpredictable. The Council expelled them. Trade access was revoked. Diplomatic channels closed. Legal recognition withdrawn. Humanity was cut loose from the galactic system with the casual confidence of an authority that believed isolation was a death sentence. The Council expected collapse. They expected panic. Infighting. A desperate plea for reinstatement once scarcity set in. Instead, humanity went quiet. No protests echoed through the void. No threats were issued. No apologies offered. Just silence. Focused. Deliberate. Because humanity had never believed belonging was protection. They believed survival came from preparation. And as the galaxy turned its attention elsewhere, convinced it had resolved a minor inconvenience, humanity did what it had always done best. They adapted. They reorganized. They prepared for a universe that had just proven it would abandon them without hesitation. No one realized how dangerous that mistake would be. Because expelling a species that expects systems to fail doesn't weaken it. It teaches it exactly how strong it needs to become, and who it can never afford to trust again. The Galactic Council tightened its grip. They called it regulatory enforcement. They recorded it as administrative necessity. In truth, it was punishment, applied with the cold precision of a body that had never needed to doubt its own authority. Trade was cut. Human shipping corridors were reclassified as non-essential. Docking permissions stalled indefinitely. Insurance networks quietly labeled human vessels economically unstable, making commerce impossible without ever declaring it illegal. Critical imports, medical compounds, advanced alloys, specialized processors, were reassigned to restricted status. Markets across human space shuddered. Peripheral colonies felt it first. Then the core worlds. Shortages appeared. Prices rose. Supply chains frayed. Council economists watched calmly. They had seen this before. Scarcity bred unrest. Unrest bred division. Division forced compliance. Then came the legal severance. Rights were revoked. Human representatives were stripped of recognition. Observer status dissolved without appeal. Databanks that once returned open information now answered human queries with silence or sanitized fragments. Travel authorizations expired and were not renewed. Diplomatic channels collapsed into automated acknowledgments. Humanity ceased to exist in council law. Not outlawed. Not condemned. Simply erased. Isolation followed. No fleets blockaded human systems. No weapons were aimed at Earth or its colonies. The Council didn't need force. They removed humanity from the framework that sustained interstellar civilization and waited. Humanity was pushed into isolation with the confidence of an authority that believed exclusion was fatal. The Council expected collapse. They expected old rivalries to explode under pressure. Expected colonies to hoard resources. Expected political factions to turn on one another once scarcity made cooperation inconvenient. Projections were drafted. Months to economic instability. 1 year to major unrest. 2 years to desperate negotiations. But the collapse didn't come. Human systems stabilized instead of fracturing. Emergency protocols activated before shortages peaked. Manufacturing priorities shifted quietly, without public debate. Rationing was implemented calmly, efficiently, without panic or spectacle. There were no mass riots. No planetary secessions. Human communication traffic surged, but not with outrage. With coordination. Rival governments that had spent centuries undermining one another began sharing data without treaties or announcements. Long-standing disputes were shelved as irrelevant. The Council flagged the anomaly. Then dismissed it. They mistook restraint for denial. What they failed to understand was that humanity had practiced for this its entire history. Financial crashes. Political failures. Environmental catastrophes. Systems breaking when they were needed most. Isolation wasn't a shock. It was familiar. Humanity didn't appeal for reinstatement. Didn't threaten retaliation. Didn't beg to be heard. They did something far more unsettling. They stopped asking. Trade rerouted inward. Local industries expanded into roles once outsourced to the galaxy. Old technologies were revived, redesigned, and scaled beyond what Council standards had ever permitted. Every regulation was followed, perfectly. Every clause obeyed to the letter. Every loophole used without technically violating a single rule. Sanctions meant to isolate human space began rippling outward, damaging Council-aligned economies that had quietly depended on human adaptability. The Council waited for fracture. It never came. Instead, human space grew quieter. More ordered. More deliberate. Reports began noting a troubling trend. Humanity was becoming self-sufficient. Less dependent on external trade. Less responsive to political pressure. Less affected by authority that functioned only when it was acknowledged. Containment had always worked because species feared isolation. Humanity did not. They treated it as a condition to engineer around. And somewhere deep in the Council's projections, a realization began to form, one no one wanted to voice aloud. You cannot control a civilization that has learned how to survive without you. And once that lesson is learned, authority stops being a weapon and becomes an afterthought. Isolation was meant to finish what expulsion had begun. That was the Council's certainty. History supported it. Cut a civilization off from trade, legitimacy, and external support, and it would fracture. Old grudges would resurface. Cooperation would collapse into competition. Eventually, desperation would force submission. Humanity should have broken. It didn't. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, the change was quiet enough to miss. Political broadcasts shortened. Ideological debates lost their edge. Leaders who once thrived on division found fewer audiences willing to listen. When the last external trade lanes went silent, humanity stopped arguing about who was right and started asking a more urgent question. Who would still be alive tomorrow? Old divisions vanished. Not erased. Not forgiven. Set aside. Borders remained on maps, but they stopped dictating behavior. Rival governments paused centuries-old disputes without treaties or public declarations. There were no speeches about unity, no celebrations of reconciliation. Humanity didn't romanticize cooperation. They defaulted to it. Because isolation stripped away illusion. There was no higher authority to appeal to. No external power to stabilize failure. No council fleet arriving to restore order if things went wrong. Humanity was alone. And once that reality settled in, priorities aligned with brutal clarity. Emergency councils formed across Earth and its colonies, but instead of multiplying bureaucracy, they dismantled it. Overlapping authorities were merged or discarded. Decision chains were shortened. Not centralized for control, but streamlined for speed. What emerged wasn't an empire. It was coordination. For the first time in human history, every major colony agreed on a single operational framework. Not built on ideology. Not culture. Not dominance. Survival. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't a throne or a single leader. It was a system, lean, adaptive, unforgiving of inefficiency. Authority became situational. Whoever had the clearest data and fastest response acted. Prestige vanished. Ego became a liability. Logistics became power. Supply chains that once competed synchronized across systems. Manufacturing priorities aligned without negotiation. Research divisions opened archives sealed for generations, sharing breakthroughs once guarded by profit, secrecy, or pride. Humanity stopped optimizing against itself. They optimized for endurance. Military forces changed, not in size, but in purpose. Fleets once designed to deter rivals were restructured to protect infrastructure, evacuation corridors, and population centers. Training doctrine abandoned decisive victories in favor of prolonged survival under catastrophic conditions. Humanity stopped planning for wars they hoped to win. They planned for disasters they intended to outlast. Civilians were folded into preparedness without ceremony. Engineers trained for emergency repair. Medics drilled for mass casualty scenarios. Colonists learned redundancy protocols as naturally as daily routines. Humanity did not militarize its population. It prepared it. And then came the silence. No protests. No defiant broadcasts. No pleas sent into the void. Human communication traffic actually decreased, even as coordination reached levels no external observer had ever recorded. Unity did not make humanity louder. It made them efficient, focused, unsettlingly calm. Council analysts, still monitoring from afar, misread the data. Silence had always meant submission before. They believed humanity had accepted exile. That isolation had taught them humility. In truth, isolation had taught humanity something else entirely. Clarity. They stopped measuring success by recognition or inclusion. They measured it by resilience. By how well systems held under pressure. By how little external approval mattered when survival was on the line. Isolation did what no treaty ever could. It forced humanity to see itself as a single organism. Every colony understood its role. Every fleet knew its purpose. Every citizen knew what was at stake. If no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Not out of anger. Not out of defiance. Out of necessity. And that was the moment the Council truly lost control, though it wouldn't realize it for some time yet. Because a divided species can be managed. A fractured civilization can be pressured. But a species unified by survival, one that no longer believes authority guarantees safety, cannot be contained. Humanity had not united to challenge the galaxy. They had united to endure it. And once they did, regret became inevitable. Because the Council had not expelled a weak species. They had expelled one that now stood together. And would never again depend on anyone else to decide whether it lived or died. In silence, humanity evolved. There were no announcements. No grand demonstrations meant to force the galaxy's attention. Humanity had learned the price of being seen, and chose to disappear instead. Isolation stripped away distraction. Research institutions that once competed for prestige were reorganized into unified networks. Projects delayed for political convenience were accelerated by necessity. Engineers stopped designing for approval and started designing for failure, assuming systems would break, supply lines would vanish, and help would never come. New engines came first. Not engines built to win races or expand borders, but engines designed to endure. Drives that could operate for years without external maintenance. Propulsion systems tolerant of damage, inefficiency, and improvised repair. Human ships sacrificed raw speed for reliability, redundancy, and range. They could go farther without support. They could stay longer without resupply. They no longer depended on permission to move. Then came the shields. Galactic doctrine favored massive, singular energy barriers, powerful, expensive, and catastrophic when they failed. Humanity rejected that philosophy entirely. They layered everything. Adaptive fields that reshaped under pressure. Redundant systems that degraded slowly instead of collapsing all at once. Structural materials that absorbed force rather than resisting it. Human shields were not invincible. They were relentless. They bent. They cracked. They kept working. Weapons development followed, but quietly. Humanity did not chase superweapons or extinction-level firepower. They focused on tools that functioned after prolonged isolation. Weapons that could be repaired in deep space by exhausted crews using limited resources. Human weapons were not elegant. They were dependable. And then there were the fleets. They were not assembled in massive shipyards that could be observed, catalogued, and threatened. Production was distributed across dozens of systems. Hull sections fabricated in civilian industries. Components built to common standards, modular and interchangeable. No single ship mattered. No single loss could cripple the whole. Fleets were built not for conquest, but survival. Human naval doctrine changed with them. Ships were designed to operate independently, cut off from command, relying on shared principles rather than constant communication. Crews were cross-trained relentlessly. Every officer understood logistics. Every technician understood combat repair. Human fleets assumed chaos as the default. Loss of communication. Overwhelming odds. Extended isolation. They trained until those conditions felt routine. The galaxy noticed nothing. Council sensors detected no alarming mobilization. No aggressive maneuvers. No treaty violations. After all, humanity was no longer bound by treaties at all. Human space appeared quiet, constrained, irrelevant. Exactly as intended. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Not for revenge. For inevitability. Human simulations grew darker. Scenarios assumed hostile powers, collapsing alliances, and enemies immune to diplomacy. Victory was redefined. Not defeat the enemy. Ensure continuation. If a colony survived, the mission succeeded. If a fleet endured catastrophic loss and still functioned, the mission succeeded. If humanity remained, everything else was secondary. Command structures flattened. Authority became situational. Any unit could assume control. Any plan could be abandoned instantly if reality demanded it. Humanity stopped fearing failure. They learned to absorb it. The Council, reviewing outdated reports, concluded humanity had stagnated. That expulsion had capped their development. That isolation had worked. They were wrong. Humanity had not slowed. They had finished building. What remained was refinement. Stress testing. Quiet positioning beyond observation and assumption. And when the moment finally came, when the galaxy faced something it could not debate, sanction, or ignore, it would not find a broken civilization struggling in exile. It would find a species that had spent years preparing for abandonment. Because humanity never trusted stability. They trusted readiness. And they were ready. Long before anyone realized how badly the Council had misjudged them. The first warning was easy to dismiss. A frontier system went dark, no distress signal, no debris field, no evidence of battle. Council analysts labeled it a relay failure and reassigned the sensors. Border regions were unstable. Data gaps happened. Then another system vanished. Then another. By the time evacuation traffic began spilling across unsanctioned routes, the pattern was undeniable. Refugees carried fragments of recordings, corrupted telemetry, and the same name whispered with mounting certainty. The Dominion. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. They arrived. The Dominion was not an alliance or a crusade. It was an empire engineered for expansion, every doctrine refined for speed, efficiency, and permanence. Their fleets moved with mechanical precision, overwhelming defenses before panic could organize into resistance. Worlds fell. Orbital platforms were neutralized within minutes. Planetary shields collapsed under sustained, methodical pressure. Defensive fleets were dismantled in sequence, not annihilated in spectacle, but rendered irrelevant. Infrastructure was seized intact wherever possible. The Dominion did not seek destruction. They sought control. Species were enslaved, not exterminated, catalogued. Populations were sorted by utility. Administrators retained. Labor forces reassigned. Biological resources indexed. Resistance was not punished publicly. It was removed quietly, efficiently, and permanently. Fear spread faster than any invasion wave. Council-aligned task forces were dispatched, veteran fleets equipped with technologies that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. They engaged the Dominion and disappeared. Not in glorious explosions, but in silence. Their formations unraveled under tactics the Council had no answer for. And still, the Council argued. Emergency sessions convened and collapsed into procedural paralysis. Ancient rivalries resurfaced. Voting blocs stalled action. Committees debated jurisdiction and response thresholds, while live feeds showed cities burning and evacuation corridors failing. Some delegates called for negotiation. Others demanded sanctions. A few proposed sacrifice, ceding outer systems to buy time. Time was something the Dominion did not allow. As invasion fronts pushed inward, Council authority fractured. Member species recalled fleets to defend their own worlds. Mutual defense treaties were reinterpreted, delayed, or quietly ignored. Trade collapsed as fear overrode obligation. The Council could recommend. It could debate. It could not act. Within cycles, the unthinkable became reality. The Galactic Council, the oldest authority the galaxy had ever known, was losing. That was when the chamber fell silent. Someone said the name no one wanted to hear. Humanity. The objections came immediately. Humanity was expelled. Isolated. Politically erased. Their fleets were undocumented. Their technology unverified. Their intentions unknown. Some delegates insisted humanity was barely holding together in exile, if it still existed at all. But others remembered. Human space had gone quiet long before the Dominion appeared. No collapse. No refugee waves. No desperate transmissions begging for aid. Just absence, orderly, deliberate absence. Reluctantly, the Council authorized contact. The message they sent was careful, polite, urgent without sounding desperate. It spoke of shared survival, collective defense, and the need for unity against an existential threat. It did not mention expulsion. It did not include apologies. Humanity received it. They did not respond immediately. While Council worlds burned, humanity reviewed the data. Dominion fleet movements. Tactical doctrines. Logistics throughput. Behavioral patterns. They compared it against internal simulations, some of which mirrored the unfolding invasion with disturbing accuracy. The Council expected panic. They got deliberation. When humanity finally replied, the response was calm, measured, almost unsettling in its restraint. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses were insufficient. They stated, plainly, that humanity possessed the capability to engage. There was no promise of rescue, only consideration. The Council protested, invoked shared destiny, demanded urgency, reminded humanity of what was at stake. Humanity did not hurry. Because another system fell, this one close enough to the Council core that evacuation sirens echoed through the chamber itself. Delegates who had argued procedure minutes earlier now begged for intervention. And in that moment, the truth crystallized. The Council had expelled the one civilization that had prepared for abandonment. They had isolated the species that planned for systemic failure. They had dismissed the people who built for survival instead of dominance. The Dominion did not fear authority. It did not respect tradition. It did not pause for debate. And the only civilization that had planned for an enemy like that was the one the Council had cast out. Stripped of leverage and illusion, the Galactic Council did the unthinkable. They turned to humanity, not as a subordinate, not as a member, but as the last civilization that might still be capable of acting, while the rest of the galaxy was still arguing over what should be done. And in that choice, regret finally arrived. Quiet, heavy, and impossibly late. The Council expected forgiveness. They had prepared for it, carefully diluted apologies wrapped in phrases like shared survival and past misunderstandings. In every crisis before this one, fear had produced reconciliation. Authority bent, expressed regret just enough, and endured. They believed humanity would follow the pattern. Humanity did not. The response arrived without ceremony. No emotional framing. No accusations. Just confirmation of receipt, verification of the data, and a short list of inconsistencies in the Council's threat projections. The Council answered immediately. Then they waited. When humanity's decision finally came, it was calm, so calm it unsettled the chamber more than outrage ever could. Humanity acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses would fail. They stated that they had anticipated such a scenario. Then came the sentence that drained the room of sound. We will decide when to act. No conditions followed. No appeal for trust. No justification. Just resolve. The Council erupted. Delegates shouted about moral obligation and shared extinction. Some accused humanity of cruelty. Others of arrogance. A few tried to reassert authority, invoking charters, sanctions, and jurisdiction as if repetition might restore their power. Humanity did not reply. They didn't need to, because authority does not survive the moment it is ignored. Within hours, deep space observatories began reporting anomalies near the edge of human-controlled space. Not weapons signatures. Not fleet movements. Something subtler. Gravitational sensors registered rhythmic distortions, too precise to be natural. Navigation beacons recalibrated themselves without instruction. Light bent at odd angles, as if the fabric of space were being adjusted rather than disturbed. Council engineers blamed calibration drift. They were wrong. Independent traders began transmitting reports, vast silhouettes appearing and vanishing beyond detection thresholds. Not fleets in formation, but structures repositioning with deliberate intent. Patterns emerging across regions too large for coincidence. Humanity was not mobilizing. They were aligning. A final transmission arrived, short, unencrypted, unmistakably human. Any engagement with the Dominion would occur on human terms. Timing, location, and scope would be determined by human command. Council authorization was unnecessary. Oversight would not be accepted. This was not a threat. It was a boundary. For the first time since its founding, the Galactic Council faced a truth it could not argue away. Humanity did not need its permission, did not fear its displeasure, did not confuse urgency with obligation. As the chamber dissolved into chaos, something unexpected happened on the invasion front. The Dominion slowed. Not halted. Not repelled. Just slowed, enough for their commanders to notice irregularities in predictive models that had never failed before. Enough to sense resistance before it appeared. Somewhere beyond the reach of Council authority, something vast finished positioning itself. Space itself seemed to tremble. Humanity had not yet acted. But the galaxy already understood what the Council could not. Forgiveness is asked for by the weak. Permission is requested by the dependent. Humanity was neither. And when they finally chose to act, it would not be because the Council had asked, but because humanity had decided the moment had arrived. The Dominion never realized the war had begun. There was no surge of energy to warn them. No subspace distortion. No violent transition screaming across their sensors. One moment, their invasion armadas advanced through conquered systems with mechanical confidence, thousands of warships arranged in formations perfected over centuries of conquest. The next moment, space was no longer empty. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. They did not arrive from anywhere. They did not tear holes in reality or announce themselves with catastrophic force. They simply resolved into existence, vast shapes unfolding from the void as if space itself had decided to give them form. Massive, precise, unstoppable. The formations made no sense to Dominion tacticians. The ships were not clustered for assault, nor spread randomly for intimidation. They occupied exact positions across light minutes of space, sealing off vectors before the Dominion even recognized they existed. This was not a battle line. It was a containment field. Dominion sensors lagged behind reality, struggling to reconcile mass where moments ago there had been nothing. Targeting solutions flickered, recalculated, failed. Command algorithms spiraled, unable to explain how an entire opposing force had appeared without triggering a single warning threshold. Before the first firing order could be issued, every channel lit up. Primary command frequencies. Encrypted tactical relays. Emergency fallback bands. Even internal fleet coordination networks thought to be unreachable. One message crossed every protocol at once. Stand down. It was not amplified, not threatening. It carried no emotion, only certainty. The Dominion fired. They always did. The opening volley never reached its targets. Human defenses did not intercept the energy. They absorbed it. Layered fields reshaped in real time, bending and redistributing force across systems designed to endure punishment rather than resist it. Power that should have shattered any known shield simply vanished into controlled dissipation. The Dominion adapted instantly. They never got the chance to fire again. Across the invasion fleet, weapon systems desynchronized by fractions of a second, imperceptible individually, catastrophic collectively. Power grids slipped out of phase. Reactors throttled down to emergency limits. Shields collapsed inward, not destroyed, but rendered inert. Drives failed. Thousands of ships went dead in space. Alive. Intact. Helpless. Humanity had not attacked the fleet. They had removed its ability to fight. Dominion command structures unraveled in moments. Emergency protocols refused to execute. Self-destruct systems failed silently. Engineers screamed into command channels that no longer responded, unable to understand why their most trusted redundancies had turned against them. Human systems were not overpowering Dominion technology. They were exploiting it. They reached into assumptions so fundamental the Dominion had never thought to protect them. Dependencies that worked flawlessly against weaker civilizations and catastrophically against an opponent that had built everything around resilience instead of dominance. Then one human vessel moved. It advanced alone, gliding forward with deliberate calm. Its hull bore no markings, no insignia, no declaration of ownership. Just a presence so controlled it felt inevitable. It transmitted once more. This conflict is concluded. There were no demands. No negotiations. The statement was final. As the data propagated through Dominion command networks, fleets in neighboring systems halted mid-advance. Slave transports powered down. Occupation forces abandoned positions without orders, unsure whether movement itself would trigger the same silent neutralization. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Only then did humanity acknowledge the galaxy. A single open transmission, brief, factual, and devoid of triumph. The threat had been neutralized. Hostilities were concluded. No territory had changed hands. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to stop the war. Council observers watched in stunned silence as Dominion armadas drifted powerless in the dark, entire fleets undone without spectacle, without devastation, without permission. And in that moment, the truth the Council had refused to accept finally became undeniable. They had expelled humanity believing it was weak. They had been wrong. And the price of that mistake was now written across the stars. In silence, in stillness, and in the absolute certainty that the galaxy would never make that error again. The Council tried to reclaim control. Emergency assemblies were called in rapid succession. Ancient charters were retrieved, recited, and amended as if repetition could restore relevance. Authority clauses were reaffirmed with sharper language, firmer tones, and increasingly desperate urgency. The galaxy listened. And then it moved on. It was too late. Because authority does not survive the moment it is proven unnecessary. Worlds once bound to council procedure rebuilt without waiting for approval. Defense agreements formed laterally, between neighbors who had watched the council debate while systems burned. Trade resumed along routes humanity had stabilized, not the sanctioned corridors that had once defined legitimacy. The council still existed. But it no longer mattered. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They declined every offer of leadership, refused permanent seats of power, ignored proposals to restructure galactic governance around them. They claimed no territory, issued no laws, demanded no tribute. They simply stepped back. Not into exile, but into readiness. Human fleets dispersed into the dark in patterns no strategist could map. They did not linger over capitals or patrol borders. They positioned themselves where history showed authority failed first: fracture zones, unstable regions, the quiet edges where something dangerous always emerged. Always distant. Always present. Never demanding obedience. The galaxy began to understand what humanity had become. Not rulers. Not enforcers. A contingency. When disputes flared, humanity did not intervene. When old empires tested one another's resolve, humanity remained silent. They did not threaten consequences. They did not promise protection. Their existence alone changed behavior. Former Dominion officers, those few left alive and unbound, spoke quietly among themselves. Not of human weapons, but of human restraint. Of fleets that could have erased them and chose instead to end the war cleanly, decisively, and without spectacle. That restraint carried more weight than terror ever had. The Council issued one final declaration, warning that a galaxy without centralized authority would descend into chaos. Few listened. Fewer believed it. Because the galaxy had learned something the Council never had. Stability enforced by tradition eventually fails. Stability enforced by readiness endures. Humanity had proven that leadership was not inherited through age, titles, or unanimous votes. It emerged from preparation, from competence, from the willingness to act when action was required, and the discipline to stop when it was not. So the galaxy adapted. It always does. And somewhere beyond the bright halls where authority once lived, humanity watched the stars in silence. Not from thrones. Not from councils. From the dark. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no desire to. They had simply proven a truth no civilization could forget. If darkness rises again, if something worse comes out of the void, if the galaxy hesitates when it matters most, humanity will be there. Not to command. Not to conquer. But to make sure there is still a galaxy left when the darkness falls.